Okay, we have lift off. Welcome to Imagineering, Shabaka.
Hi.
I'm going to kick off our show today. As Imagineering is about, it's my ode to creation because I believe we're sat in it constantly.
Mm.
Or should I say we're sat or studying it constantly, whether it's the clothes we wear, the food we eat, or the music we listen to. It was imagined somewhere and then realized. So this
Mm.
is what Imagineering is an ode to. So that's the title of one of my songs from my upcoming album, the Shout Out to Freedom. So you've given me a selection of music because the request was for people to share um, music that represents some form of freedom. And it's a really interesting selection that you've
Yeah.
given me because there's stuff there I've not heard before, which I love.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to before we start and roll deep into our conversation, I want to kick off with this 400 Years, which I didn't know this song.
Oh, wow, now this
You
is
know,
a real classic album,
yeah, and I
Ground
was,
Nation. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, how do I not know this song? So because of that, I'm going to kick off that, and then we're going to chat. Yeah.
Cool.
Years of colonial red has brought the people misread, has left them such pain. The talk is now of independence, you see. Seems it wasn't meant for you or for me. As strangers we came, slave trade was the game. And ever since we don't even know our name. Our heritage we must remember. And all that they did to mother and father. So people, for what it's worth, demands your freedom here upon earth. Stop asking when, where, and how. Make up your mind, the time is now.
What a deep record that is.
Yeah, man.
And a nice start to our conversation. So tell me about that piece of music, what it means to you. I mean, obviously the message is very clear.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think one of my foundational records, actually, Count Ossie and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari,
Right.
album Ground Nation. And the first thing that got me on this album was actually the atmosphere, the actual, like, the mood that is in the studio or wherever they recorded it, And I remember listening to it and just thinking, that's the atmosphere I need to have, that atmosphere of, like, sacrality. Like,
Yeah.
you really feel like there's a there's a ceremony happening in that space, especially when you hear the whole album and how it develops. It's not just, some mics were set up in a sterile environment
Yeah.
and they pressed record. Also, this is being made as a homage to, the kind of liberation, the liberation movement in the Caribbean, in terms of actually remembering what has been done, and the fact that, the idea of freedom is a continual process that needs to be, connected to remembrance,
Yeah.
or else you just forget what you're actually trying to be free of. And speaking of that, it's probably important for me to actually, um, address the elephant in the room in terms of what freedom actually means to me, because
Yeah.
this is, like, when I was trying to choose the songs that I was going to present to you, I got stuck because I went for the usual suspects at first, and I was like, oh yeah, freedom, I know what to do. Yeah, yeah, it's some free stuff. And then I
Yeah.
started to think, what is freedom though? When you take away the almost like childlike definitions that are often not really explained that much, but are kind of held as like societal givens. Freedom means like happiness, or freedom means, the kind of unsaid things.
Yeah.
What I kind of thought of is the fact that, when I really kind of go deep, freedom is the state that you get when oppression or restriction is relieved, as opposed to it being an ideal that's separate from its opposing force.
Yes.
And that's it's a real important differentiation, because if freedom is connected to the oppression, it means you've got to conceptualize the oppression in order to understand what freedom is, like what you're going towards. Whereas if freedom is seen as just something in and of itself, without a real understanding of the forces that need to be dealt with to achieve that state, then it just becomes this like blind utopia that you're progressing towards without any real knowledge of or understanding of what the thing actually is.
Which is why freedom is never given to you.
Exactly.
It's never given to you. It's you have to fight for it.
Yeah.
I find it really, really interesting because they said, like they said, things come round in cycles, right? And it's quite easy for us to forget, as you say, right, that
Mm.
in some shape or form we've been here before, right, and had these same questions and had to fight for them because somebody fought for them for us a long,
Yeah.
long time ago, and somehow, even though it's not even that long ago, somehow, with all the information that we are kind of, let's say, like, should I say, like, completely bombarded with, it's quite easy to forget.
I really kind of believe in cycles, in that
Yeah,
nothing is really erased.
yeah,
Things might be erased for like a period, a generation, or a certain period of time, but it's very difficult to erase history, to actually erase it to a point where it's actually completely forgotten.
yeah,
Like it's unretrievable. They've tried it a lot, especially when you look at like pro African analysis of the history of Egypt. For instance, you start to really read about the systematic erasure of a lot of Egyptian history, especially in the Black civilization, as opposed to from the Arab conquest.
yeah,
And if in a force like this that was actually really trying to kind of cover elements of that Egyptian history, we still have it. We can, if you search for it, within
yeah,
all the information that we're bombarded with. So, and sometimes it takes things to be covered for things to actually be seen, to be uncovered and seen for what they are, because it's all, everything happens in cycles of, discovery and, versus hiddenness, you
yeah,
know
yeah,
it's never going to be a fact that everything is always known. It takes maybe a period of things being unknown for the value and the meaning of things to be appreciated when they are known. It might be like for a generation, a lot of information about how the generation that follows it has gotten to the state that they are in. It
yeah,
might take a generation of people wallowing around in the dark for, in the future, people to actually understand what's happened and what needs to be done. But that wouldn't have occurred if it hadn't been for maybe a generation, forgetting, because
Yeah,
everything happens in cycles. You've got to have forgetting to remember.
that's
You're
very
not going to
true.
have a constant remembering.
I had a feeling I was going to be able to have this kind of conversation with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
because not only just because of your music, but you have a very, very unique and beautiful way of using your titles for songs,
Mm,
right? That immediately, I mean, they immediately make you question. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? They bring a question to you, like, So, and I thought this conversation is going to be deep because
Yeah.
I
It's
know,
about the question mark, not the full stop, basically.
yes, yes,
Or if you're going to
yes,
have a full stop, make it like 3 or 4 full stops.
yeah,
you know,
yeah, because there could still be a question at the end
it
of
can still be a
that.
question. Yeah.
So I was just like, I need to. I hear it within your music. I hear like what we were talking about in your music. I hear this. I hear the question, but I hear the curiosity and the wonder
Mm,
in there. Like some of your titles, like obviously the afterlife, like kind of speaks for itself. It asks the question, right?
yeah.
Um, and with that, so directly to you, you know, how do you feel about the idea of the afterlife?
Um, I don't. It's a tough one to. I feel like there's different dimensions, and there's a dimension outside of the physical realm.
Yeah,
I don't think of it as in an afterlife, as in there's just a life that happens after ours. I think that there's an arena that has multiple dimensions. Some
yeah,
are more concretely in the physical, some are kind of like halfway through and accessible to only people that understand certain, that can perceive certain subtleties in terms of energy.
yeah,
And some are just on other forms in terms of out of the space, outer space, but out of the space that we reside in. But I don't think that there's another world. I think that this world that we're in is just more complex than our physical space, than the combination of our physical atoms, in the
and
present.
how have you found that understanding?
Just from reading loads of stuff, it's like you read loads of stuff, you have experiences, and then you just have ideas of what you think is what things are. It's not like a certain book. It's just, how I think about what what I'm in after, my life of reading stuff, especially to do with, for instance, Kemet,
Yeah,
what the Kemetic initiation principles were. I've read quite a bit in that. I read a bit, about about Yoruba culture and how they think about, the arena that we're in, and how that arena is populated by deities that are actually energy and emotional states. And then just thinking about, how does that relate to me living in a city?
yeah,
Because this is the thing. It's like, it's not that these things are just accessible to people that live in other places. They're just ways of perceiving,
yeah.
what we go through.
And do you find, I might be stating off this question here, but them shifts in dimension, have you had them experiences playing?
Um, well, what I find is that the shift in dimension alters the way that you play, because when you play, you're expressing yourself. You're expressing where you're at, your temperament. You're expressing like what your kind of core will is capable of.
Yeah,
Especially like me, it's like when I'm playing like properly, as in a band that we've crafted the music for. It's like we're trying to really give as much as ourselves as possible. So, for instance, if I'm reading a bunch of stuff about energy and about, breathing, and about, how a lot of cultures see the breath as real, important in terms of um manifesting more energy, or actually kind of locking on to the energy currents that are just around us. If I'm tapped into that dimension of the importance of the breath, then when I play, I'm going to be employing those principles, and it'll just mean that actually at a core spirit will level, I'll be able to give more. because
And
playing is just a release of energy, you know.
so, and when you've had that experience and you've come off stage, and that's the affirmation, right? And you've come off stage and you're like, because I know I've had this experience when you come off and you're like, it's almost like you knew what your intention was, and then
Mm.
you experience what you intended, but then you come off stage and still go, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like you have them wows, like you're like, this is some, it's not even you. It's like, you're channeling something else. Do you know what I mean? There's no label or name needed for it. But do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? You've had that wow moment, and you're just like, you're tapped into something now.
Yeah, and it's like, and this is where I find the whole idea of indigenous ways of seeing things important, because you might go, I just went somewhere, and that's where the English language stops,
Yeah,
you know. But there are lots of cultures that actually go, wait a minute, let's think about what did you go into? Let's kind of put a conceptual structure around that and see that as important, and see did you do before to allow you access to that state. You know, will you get to that state every time you play, or was it a certain thing? So I know that, for instance, if I don't eat like 3 hours, 4 hours before I play, my body is light enough for me to access a state of more energy. You know, if I,
yeah,
for instance, don't eat meat before I play, a similar thing. If I, do certain meditation or practices before I play, things are going to happen. And this is all like a construct to evoke a specific type of energy when I'm on stage. So, for instance, if you call that energy, the specific type of energy and what it does, a deity, for instance, and you
yeah,
say you've not just had evoked an energy, you've called a deity that has given you that energy. It didn't come from nowhere, it was actually given to you. So
yeah,
what gave it to you? And then, if our forefathers have told us this, it's been highly documented, like what gives you certain types of energy, and
yeah,
what you need to do to appease them.
yeah.
And that's the foundation of a lot of, like Yoruba religion, and, for instance, like Kemet.
It's beautiful, man. I mean, this is the
Mm,
thing as well with like music never stops amazing me,
mm.
because it's not just the music itself.
No,
It's
no, no.
like any situation I find myself in, like this conversation, is because of music.
Yeah, yeah. I don't,
And that's, like, or I could be, I don't know, sat on a sun lounger in a foreign country somewhere, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm here because of music.
yeah.
Or do you know what I mean? Or I don't know, I've just met like a person in the airport who's just told me an incredible conversation, but I wouldn't be sat in that airport if it wasn't for
Mm,
music.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I
I
mean? And
mean,
when you,
no, go
oh,
on.
sorry, no, I think when you start to be aware of it and appreciate it on all its levels, and there's many of them. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and how it intertwines into everything, especially when you have a relationship with music in the way that we do.
Mm,
It never stops amazing me. You know?
yeah, yeah. No, the other thing with music is, like, if you think of like what spiritually potent things are, like what constitutes something that you would say is potent spiritually. Generally, it's matter that has had a certain amount of attention, given to it. So, like, this is one of the kind of foundations of like kind of spiritual thought. It's like matter doesn't have spirituality innately. It's not like, there's certain things that are just spiritual in and of themselves. Actually, maybe a few things, but it's like, if you have a pencil, and you kind of put that pencil and you concentrate on it every single day within a certain very specific headspace, then that pencil will be significant to you. And if you start to actually conceptualize that that pencil is energy given, and actually just be like, I'm going to concentrate on this and really try to draw whatever I can from this pencil, then it will give you something, if you completely believe and give into that. So, like, if spirituality, it's not like, you have to have a specific, bush, and these things help, especially if they've been done before, but it's something that, things have spirit. If you give your attention to something, it will have some kind of power if it's enough attention given to it. So you make a song, and you give that song all your attention. for a certain period of your life as a musician. And for me, the most attention and focus I can give something, the more true it becomes to my innermost spirit, the more spirituality it'll have to the listener. When the listener gives that song all their attention, and hopefully, it what's the word, resonates with their lives at a certain point, and they might give that song a lot of attention, then it has, a spiritual power from them. And I feel like when a lot of people, infuse a combination of sounds with their attention, focus, and energy, then that becomes spiritual in and of itself. So that when it's performed and they hear it live, that's when you get that magic happening, in the room, and you can feel that everyone has had experiences that are all coming together in that moment.
But then there's also a flip of that where I don't know if you've had this experience where you could spend a lot of time on a piece of music, yeah, and then another day you spent 2 hours and you've made something and you're like, eh? Only took me 2 hours. I'd
Yeah,
spent
yeah.
a week on the last tune. And then like you're like, oh well, it's just. This has happened in my experience, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where I've written a piece of music. I had like just a random idea. Yeah, just put a keyboard solo on this. I'll chop it up and da 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 da. I'm just going to use it as an interlude, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then 7 years later, this song becomes like one of the biggest songs, or do you know what I mean? And I'm like, well, I didn't really.
Yeah,
Do you know
yeah.
what I mean? And
But the
that
thing is,
happens too,
yeah,
right?
it depends what you call focus. Because if you see focus as you're sitting down and you're trying to do something,
Yeah,
specifically, then that's cool. But sometimes you get at your most focused when you're just not trying that hard,
yeah, that's very true. When you're
and it
out of the
doesn't take a
way,
long time. Yeah, when you're
yeah,
when you're self, what you consider to be your personal self, your artistic self, that
yeah.
gets out the way and just flow.
I think that's. I had this conversation as well with Green Tea Peng about like the creative process is the most purest when we learn to get out of the way, and it's actually being aware that you are in the way. It's a most challenging thing for a musician, right? Is
Mm.
to not overthink what you're doing, just to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there was an interesting quote from Kanye West actually a few years ago, and it was quantity over quality, right?
No,
And at
I see that. Yeah, yeah.
and I was like, whoa. And then he went on to explain that as long as you're mastering, stop trying to make the perfect piece of music. Just keep
Yeah,
making
yeah.
music because
No, yeah.
one of them's gonna pop. Do you know what I
Yeah, yeah.
mean? And I was just like, yeah, man, that's the same as like the person practicing football every day, the chef practicing making food all the time.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's not like I'm not trying to make the perfect plate of food. I'm just
Yeah.
making food. Do you know what I
Every
mean?
day. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
every day. Do you know what I mean? And I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just like, that was quite liberating for me hearing that, because um, I've definitely been in the space of like perfection, you know,
Mm.
definitely been there, like being like well fussy over stuff, and and I don't think I'll ever get rid of my fussiness. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah, yeah.
I'm definitely a lot more relaxed and a lot more free with myself now in the creative process.
Mm. Yeah.
It's only
I,
taken me like God, how many years?
Yeah. The thing is with that Kanye West quote is that I think a lot of people don't understand or have different ideas of what quantity means. So
Yeah,
when you say quantity over quality, then the first response is always, what do you mean? You mean you're just going to be chucking stuff out there instead of focusing on something that's perfect? But
yeah,
if you have consistent quantity, like if you chuck stuff out there, like all that, and by chuck stuff out, it doesn't necessarily mean release stuff.
yeah,
It means you just
exactly,
make stuff. If
exactly.
you're making stuff every single day, like you're making like for instance, at the moment I'm learning I'm kind of actually recent, like as in like in the last couple of weeks, I've gone up a stage in my learning of the MPC in Ableton. So I'm
Right,
like, I'm in the door of producing now. I'm there. I'm like, I've got my Mac, I've got my MPC, and I'm going. And for me, it's just like, look, if you make 3 beats a day, every single day, after a year, you'll have so much stuff that then you'll be able to reimagine what what quality is,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
And there'll
that
be,
what
yeah.
yeah, what
And there'll be,
quality is a dimension, you know,
yeah.
of you know.
And there'll be some nuggets in there.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
thing. I mean, like back in the day, I used to make these sample tapes, what we called sample tapes. So basically, it was my second set of equipment. My first set of equipment I got was like a Casio SK1 sampler. I can't reach for it, but anyway, it's like a tiny sampler. It's like 1.6 seconds sampling time,
yeah,
right? So I had that, and I had like a 4-track cassette. Right, that was my first thing that we made our first demos on. Then the upgrade from that was like a mother keyboard with a Atari ST, and it was Creator Logic back then,
yeah,
right? So then all of us on our Akai S950, right? So all of a sudden I had like so much sample time. It was like my world was blown away. Like, do you know what I mean? So what did I do? I just made sample tapes. I just
yeah,
sampled, and then I used to listen to these tapes. Like we used to go do some gigs, and then in the car we'd listen to these tapes, or after hours we'd listen to these tapes, which then became a kind of part of our lifestyle sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Which
mm,
then influenced my albums and stuff. So, but these tapes, I did like these are 90-minute tapes, bro. So like I
yeah,
was like I got like I mean I've digitized most of them now and stuff, but I had so many of these tapes. And what I would do is I would just dive back and listen to them, and then I'd go, yeah, man, make a tune out of that one.
yeah,
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 man, make a tune out of that one. Do you know what I mean? So it'd be like I've got a library of stuff just to make music out of. Fast forward to today, when I still got, when I was traveling a lot and going through different countries and stuff, I still dig in for records, especially in Asia and places just like really kind of like sort of underground places, trying to find the most quirky stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And then I came back with all that stuff, and then I just spent a day sampling, and just making like non-stop recordings. And then I'd go off and travel to go do my gigs, and I'd just be listening to these samples, making
yeah, yeah,
notes. Da, 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 da. So that was my thing, and it was almost like my own personal sound library to find inspiration. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
In the most quirkiest way and stuff like that. So that was my way of trying to keep especially when I was traveling, to keep my mind stimulated with ideas. Do you know what I mean? And doing it that way. So but
yeah.
it's great to hear that you're jumping on the beats, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've just started just making music. It's just, for me, it's like whatever keep, like you said, stimulation for
Yeah,
me is the key. Like whatever keeps you stimulated. It's like sometimes I've met musicians that have gotten so hypnotized by the quest for perfection that they're not actually stimulated anymore.
yeah,
They're just trying to complete some massive mission that they started, and they've gotten lost. Whereas for me, it's just like as soon as I feel that getting lost, I'm like, okay, let me just move on to something else, and then I'll just come back, when my
yeah,
mind's in a different place. And it's just about getting that, for one, it's like, if me, if you're a musician, you're a musician, like regardless of what your specific tools are.
yeah,
So if you're like, I consider myself to be a musician. So if my tools are the MPC, I'll just make music on that.
yeah,
And it's great because it means that actually I can make music in more places, and that music has a finality. That's
yeah,
the thing with production. It's like I can practice stuff, but unless I'm practicing it and recording it on the sax, for instance, then that music happens in the present and then it disappears, which is amazing in itself. Like, don't
yeah,
get me wrong, that's a special part of music making, like playing for yourself and having that playing just be in the present moment. But to have these moments, of inspiration, or these moments where you really kind of find something musically, but actually have that documented in the, like in a producer, if you just make a beat or make a melody line, then it's there. It's like it's got a finality to it. It can be built on.
yeah,
And I love that idea that whatever state you go into, it might be, and by state I don't necessarily mean in terms of um just any state. Like you're in a certain state in the morning, you're in a state if you go to a new country and you're seeing things that you've not seen before, that kind of wonder, that vibe. If you go to a hot country after being in a cold one, it's all different states that the combination of cells that comprise you has to deal with, different vibrational states. So for me, if you're just creative, if you're able to create and final music in all of these states, you'll just get a real varied emotional landscape of stuff.
definitely, yeah,
And that's
Definitely.
what it's about, documenting our emotional landscapes so that we can tell people we are more than these unidimensional characters, you know.
When you see, when I was making, I remember like when equipment became more mobile and you could make beats on the road and stuff, you know, and like even on your phone and stuff like that. And then I'd be like, oh, like, you know, if, let's say I'm in South Africa, right? I'm gonna make a beat in my hotel
Hmm.
just to see what this place is giving me. Do you know what I
Yeah, yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Just to see energetically. I would never I've never been able to finish anything, obviously, on the road. But it's all sketches and ideas
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I
yeah.
can dive back into and stuff, you know. But like you say, like, do you have I'm thinking of me when I ask this question. Do you have like sort of almost like lightning bolt moments where musical ideas will come in and it'll be at a most random time? Like, will it be in the night? Will it be what in the supermarket? Will it
Um,
be
in general, it's just whenever I say I've got to write something,
right?
you know,
Okay,
like in general, I don't get kind of musical ideas just kind of out in whenever you know, just because I'm either thinking about stuff that I'm doing or I'm listening to music or I'm walking. I'm trying not to just be open when I'm just out there.
right.
But I've not got a reverence for the creative space. I've tried to like mold myself into, when I say create, you create. So
Okay,
if I
that's cool.
sit down if I sit down in a coffee shop and I say I am going to make a melody, I'm going to be thinking as deeply to just make whatever melody is there in the tip of my idea space. You
Yeah,
know, try to
yeah,
get it out as much as possible, as opposed to going, you know, I've got to be in a certain scenario. You know, and
yeah.
that's where the space that you're in comes in, because I there'll be a certain vibe to the environment that I'm in. You know, so if I'm waiting at a bus stop and I just make a tune, you know, that's the tune, that's just there, you know what I mean?
Do you ever have like excitement levels where you feel like you can't execute an idea quick enough?
Yeah, especially when you're learning new technology. This is the thing. It's like the more, and actually it's interesting because the more I'm learning about technology, you know, electrical technology, I'm realizing it's the same thing as learning an instrument, in
Yeah.
that you have to get past a certain level of technical efficiency and then you can be free, you know,
Yes.
to read it
Yeah,
back to
you've got
freedom.
it's
You
like
can't.
unlocking levels on a game.
Yeah, yeah. You can't be free until you get past a certain level of
Yeah.
technical proficiency. You can operate within a limited technical proficiency and you can actually make great stuff. But for me, there's always moments where I'm in my flow and then I hit a wall because I just don't know what to do on a technical level.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah.
you've got to reel back, watch some YouTube tutorials, you know,
And
and just get through it.
isn't YouTube a savior on that level?
Oh
Because
my God.
I mean, like for
Jeez.
me, for the last year, like once we went into lockdown and you know I wasn't going anywhere. Like I
Yeah.
literally wasn't like I was actually. This is the other thing as well. I was going to put to you, but I was like, I'm coming into my studio without any knowledge or even thought about leaving,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I can't remember the last time I had that feeling.
Mm,
Like literally, like you know, to like I don't have to actually be anywhere. Do you know what I mean? So that was a gift in itself. But also, I started to sit in my studio and I was like, I don't need that a piece of equipment. I don't need that. Do I even need that? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, actually, you know what? I need to do some research here, man, because like maybe there's another way of doing this stuff. And I just went down
mm.
this rabbit hole. And then I've spent the last 18 months just learning new pieces of gear, completely changed my setup and everything in a more freer, flowing way.
Yeah.
Like which I didn't even know was available to me.
Yeah. I didn't even have a microphone before the lockdown. You know what I mean? It's like, I knew for Logic, I knew basically, you know, like if I got a piece of audio, I knew how to just kind of like automate the beginning and the end to make it flow in, how to just
Yeah.
make like a quick playlist. But I didn't understand any music production. I just played an instrument. Like most
Wow.
instrumentalists, you go to college, you practice a lot, and someone else does the recording, you know, and it's just been literally to a stage where now I'm producing songs. It's crazy. It's like YouTube has literally showed everything,
You see, now
you know.
I'm actually I played a little keys. I've never read music. I don't know keys. I've always
Yeah, yeah.
trusted my ears. You know what I mean? That's how I've always been in music, and now I'm going down that rabbit hole too. So it's almost
Yeah,
like a role reversal of what you're doing, right? It's like for
yeah,
me, it's been sound manipulation and electronics and working with musicians. For
yeah.
you, it's been the musician probably working with producers and da da
Exactly. Yeah,
da. So yeah, I'm diving in, man, and I'm
yeah.
like, wow, like
It's
okay,
an interesting thing though. Like when you think, because I've been thinking about it a lot. Like people who don't understand musical theory,
yeah,
because what is musical theory? Like musical theory is people do something in the practical world that sounds good, and then they think about what's the theoretical underpinning of the events or events that have happened, so that they can replicate that general set of circumstances or
yeah,
teach it to someone else.
yeah,
But that's nothing to do with just the inspiration that led them to creating the initial thing.
exactly,
So actually, if you're involved with creation and inspiration, you don't need theory. You just
yeah,
need to be inspired
yeah,
all the time and just
yeah,
keep on making out. And it's like, what happens if you don't, like being able to write music or read music is a element of legibility. It's like you've got a certain way of expressing the vocabulary in your head
yeah,
outwards,
yeah.
but it's not needed if you have other ways of expressing that, especially through computer technology.
Yeah.
Then just get straight to the point. you
I
know
mean, there was a stage in my career I was worried about that actually
yeah,
because
yeah,
I've gone on this journey with my music, and my music became successful, and then I started working with more people, and then the level went up. Then all
mm,
of a sudden, I'm surrounded by like, people that like know this shit on another level, like you, for example, right? Do you know what I mean? And then started to question myself. I'm like, well, I don't know music. I don't know keys and da 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 da. I can hum a tune and da da. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
I'd be like that.
But
And
think
I
about it.
had this
What does it mean
conversation.
to
It,
know?
it was
Like
with
when you
two
say
players who
no.
I've worked with for a long, long time: Robin Taylor Firth, amazing keyboard player, and a guitarist called Chris Dawkins. Chris Dawkins comes from a church background. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Didn't go to any school, but just learned through church. But amazing, impeccable ear, like for he could tell you a key and da da da. Yeah, it's impeccable, right? And Robin, incredible. And I remember sitting and having a conversation with them in the studio and saying, you know what, maybe I need to learn some keys and this, that, and the other. And they both turn around and says, like, shut up, man, what are you talking about? Just like, you don't need to. It's like, it's good that you are where you are because you don't have any boundaries.
yeah,
You know, it's like, because I would find the most quirkiest and most difficult shit for them to play.
yeah,
And they'd
yeah,
be like, and then they're like, yeah, it sounds really, really good, but I'm playing it wrong. But that's what makes it wicked. Do
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
And I
know what I
think it's
mean?
like it's about the sound of it.
It's a
That's the
feel,
thing. It's
right?
about,
Yeah,
yeah, it's about sound and the feeling. And what the institutions have told us is that there's a third element. There's the sound, the feel, and the what's the word? The like legal term. The prerequisite. There's the
yeah,
sound, the feel, and what's happened in the past that result in how what it is, or the premise of it. Whereas
yeah,
actually, that's a fabrication. All it is the sound and the feel.
yeah,
So if you think, I think what I was trying to say earlier, it's like, what does it mean when you say, I don't know these instruments? And that's a real like deep one, because what is it to know an instrument, or what is it to know music, if you understand what you like and what you want to hear, and other listeners understand and appreciate what you say is the sound that you want to present. If
yeah,
that's all it is, you present sound, people take it and love it, then that is knowing music. Whereas there's a force in the world that says, no, 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 you've got to understand how to write it in this form, and you've got to understand a theory of harmonic relationships to have legitimacy. Like
yeah,
what would RZA, enter the Wu-Tang, the amount of samples that are like completely off key,
yeah,
you know, if you think of things in terms of the harmonic matrix of keys, you
yeah,
know, if you understand like on a deep level key relations, that's gonna in some way taint the choices that you make, because you're gonna think, I'll go to something that has a more that's within the consonant realm of what
yeah,
the underlying baseline is. Whereas if you're not thinking in that, you're just thinking, I like the feel, I like the texture, I like just the vibe of this piece of music, alongside this piece. I'm going to put it there,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
let everyone else deal with it. So I really think theoretical underpinning, it can be great in terms of just experimenting and actually finding sounds that you've not even thought about. But if you've got an inquisitive mind and your mind is really trying to like find new things, especially practically playing the keys or whatever, it doesn't.
Yeah, well, that the music is about adventure, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's it's about adventure. It's just like it's the same as imagination. It's about adventure. It's like how far can I stretch this idea? Do you know what I mean? Or this idea is leading me to this idea. You know, um,
Mm,
but I would say especially for any upcoming people out there making beats or doing stuff like that, is the most important message is do what you feel, right? It's 100% important to do what you feel, not what you think everybody else might like. you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
because that's where your authenticity is going to come from, right? Is about what you feel, because your music is about what you feel, right?
Yeah. And actually, um, sometimes it can feel like, like having conversations like this, like, it's like going, don't learn theory. And that's not
Yeah.
necessarily what I'm saying.
No.
It's just that it's not the center
Yeah.
of it. It's
Yeah.
something that, like, for instance, when I've learned theory, certain elements of theory, it's the things that have stayed have been the things that I've enjoyed. So there's certain times you'll read, go into a technical area of the instrument, and you enjoy it so much because it really shows you something. It's at that
Yeah.
point where you stop you stop having that spark around what you're learning, and it just
Yeah.
becomes like you've got to learn because of the system of learning that the colonial education system has given us. It means that you sometimes think you've got to just you've got to bash this into your head. If you learn it by rote, if you learn all of these pieces of information, you're going to be better somehow.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. But creativity doesn't work that way, does it? It goes back to what we were
No.
saying earlier about things flowing and being the conduit to it. It's just like, I've been in situations where I'm like, why does this song feel like a puzzle? And I
Mm,
mean, I feel like I've got all the pieces to the jigsaw, but one. And I'm now trying to find that piece. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And that takes me to I either get out of the way or walk away from it and come back to it later. Do you know what I mean? Rather than trying to it's in there, try to shove it like the square peg in the round hole kind of. I tried to make it happen. So
yeah,
it's like you say, the creative side of it and music and relationship to music should be fun, because that's the reason why we got into it and felt it in the first place, right? Is that it brought that joy to us. So, but as a creative, it's easy to forget that because we get serious.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Get serious and you start thinking, oh, this is a job, and you start thinking of a job in the way that society wants everyone to think about jobs, but we're
Yeah,
not in regular society.
yeah,
It's not that if you expend a certain amount of labor you're validated. It
yeah.
doesn't work that way. You can
No,
spend 20,000 hours making tunes, and if you're not in the right headspace, it's all going to be not to your liking. You're not going to be
yeah,
satisfied.
yeah,
Whereas you can
yeah,
be inspired, and that inspiration might come from you just being relaxed on a deep personal level. And then
yeah,
you might fulfill your role as in just get something that's really, potent, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Shabaka, we're coming close up to like over an hour of talking, amazing, amazing conversation. I think it would be ridiculous for me to not mention our collaboration,
Mm,
and the journey of that. Um, you're on two songs on my album,
yeah, yeah.
uh, 3D Warrior and Wonder. 3D Warrior featuring Wolfgang Hafner on drums, JD73 on keys, Highly Supreme on vocals, and Your Wonderful Self. Um, and I started the journey of 3D Warrior with Wolfgang Hafner. First, it was just the drums, and then I went to Leeds and recorded the keys and the bass with a guy called Alex Beans as well. Um, and then Highly came to my house, recorded the vocals. I think this was, it's really hard to look back on time when we've had a year almost erased out of our lives.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to gauge the time, but sometime pre-pandemic, Highly came to my house, and then brought you into the world. And I remember receiving both pieces of music because you went and recorded on both songs. and I was actually, I don't, you don't know this actually,
Yeah.
but when I got the files through, was actually on my birthday.
Oh wow.
It was my 50th birthday,
Oh
and
wow.
I was very, very blessed. I was in the Maldives, right? I was already in heaven anyway. But when this piece of music came through with your magic on it, I was absolutely blown away. I was absolutely overjoyed. I had the excitement we were talking about. I still have the exact excitement about it now because I can't wait for the world to hear it. Um, but just to ask you what the journey was like for you in them songs.
Um, it's just going into the studio and like listening and trying to just be, you know, be true to what the song needs. You know, like for me, it's like hearing the song and it's getting the vibe. It's like thinking like, how do I actually just be a part of this vibe, especially when you're recording in that way of like, it's not a live situation. It
Yeah,
doesn't make any, but it's a situation where you've got a certain energy you know, that's been solidified, and I've got to find something that contributes to that, even if that's replicating a melody or doing an improvised section or whatever. I've just got to find something that complements and maybe enhances the energy that's there already. But that doesn't, that just creates something for you to work with. Just to make the biggest, like kind of form of what you started.
because that's the amazing thing about the collaboration, and obviously through this time of writing this album, through the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, there's been a lot of remote stuff happening, and this is the first time we've actually connected properly, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So to do everything digitally in such a way but have the results that we have is still mind-blowing to me, because it feels like we're all together,
Yeah,
even though it was recorded in 4 different places, in 4 different spaces, in 4 different scenarios. Do you know what I mean?
hmm
There's something pretty magical about that.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a real experience.
We've gone over a lot of time here because there's been so much juice and so much beautiful things to talk
Oh
about. I
yeah,
want to
yeah.
express my deepest gratitude to you for this conversation, but most importantly for being open to collaborating with me and being a part of this album. Shout out to Freedom,
No, it's been a pleasure, man. Yeah,
and
yeah.
also for all the output of music and energy you put out into the world. It's really, really beautiful, and I send my deepest gratitude to you for that, Shabaka.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
And we should finish on a tune, right?
Yeah.
You want to choose one of the five?
um, let's see. Let me just get them up here. I reckon we should finish with Thomas Matfumo's Shumba. Actually, it's one of my favorite tunes.
Okay. So you've been tuned to Imagineering with Shabaka Hutchings and myself, DJs, Nightmares and Wax. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Shabaka. We're going to go out with Thomas Mafumba like this.
Oh, this is actually Pharaoh Sanders.
Ah.
I mean, it's cool. It's good. It's good, yeah.
Oh, well, we went to astral traveling. Well, you know what? We could skip. We don't mind. We're gonna go like this. We're ghetto.
Yeah. No. Here we go.
Bless you, brother.
Cool, man.
bakuru batuonewo ono zvaita mushoma ma aisai bakuru batuonewo iwe ono zvaita mushoma ma iwe mwini na shumba inoruma vakomana ndoita mutekateka ndenda nechitima ine oye anguranda neine anguranda neine anguranda neine
Thomas Mapfumo, Shumba. Thank you, Shabaka. Big
Cool,
love,
man.
brother.
Thank you. Great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Imagineering. Over and out, bro. Thank you, man.
Great.